Conversations with Doc Frank.
Hello and welcome to Railway Conversations with Doc Frank. I am Doc Frank, the host of this podcast, and my conversation today is with Ben Stockton, a railway signaling consultant from Auckland in New Zealand. Ben and I talk about his entry into the signaling industry, the importance that role models and mentors had for his career so far, some ways to get more talent into the signaling industry, and also how to learn about signaling in the best possible way. Ben then goes quite a bit into the weeds of signaling concepts and principles, and I think it's a great episode, especially for younger people and for people who are interested in the intricacies of railway signaling. I hope you enjoy it. This podcast is sponsor-free, which I hope you enjoy, but I still wanted to let you know about a couple of training courses for advanced signaling technology that I am offering, because there are not that many training courses of this kind around in the world. The CBTC Kickstarter course and the ETCS Kickstarter course have been around for very many years and have helped hundreds of railway professionals to educate themselves in those modern technologies, what they are, how they work, and how they can be applied in the best possible way. The website to get more information on these courses and also to enroll to the next runs of these trainings is docfranktraining.podia.com. I repeat that, docfranktraining, one word, .podia, that's PODIA.com. I hope to see you at one of my trainings. And now please enjoy my conversation with Ben Stockton. Ben Stockton, welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thanks for having me, Doc.
Not a problem. We haven't been that long connected on LinkedIn, and I think our conversation started with you offering me a picture from a point machine that's still being in service, not this very one, but the type is still in, an M23. That used to be Westinghouse. These days it's Siemens because they bought them up. And it appears that the M23 is actually nearly 100 years old. So I was quite impressed with your knowledge of railway signaling history. Maybe we can kick off by asking you what made you come into the signaling industry? Because that's not something that you studied at university, did you?
Well, I mean, I think there's only a few universities around the world who offer it as a course. I'd have taken it if it was on offer in second year of undergrad, I must say. But so I studied a mechatronics degree at the University of Auckland, and which is remarkably like the three core skills that you learn through any mechatronics degree, regardless of the quality, are how to learn a lot of information very quickly at a very surface level. You had to learn, the very basic principles of mechanical, electrical, electronic, and software design. And then you also had to learn, basic, design principles and design integration and management. So those skill sets, in my opinion, are a very natural fit for, graduating to the railway signaling telecommunications industry. And I found a real home here. But I didn't go directly in from graduation. I was actually hired first as an intern and then as a graduate engineer as doing digital engineering at IRSE New Zealand. Which I'm sure many of the listeners will be familiar with, rather large infrastructure consultancy, and that has a very, very large presence in Australia and a growing presence in New Zealand.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Just for the 2% of viewers who don't know who IRSE is, and they'll be from New Zealand. So as digital engineering, you really have to split digital engineering, in my opinion, into two things. You've got the process automation side of it, and which includes, automating structural designs, writing basically very clever scripts that take, repetitive tasks, mostly in structural design, but sometimes in geotech data processing too, and basically reducing the amount of structural engineering time that needs to be spent on the task. Then there's also the value-added stuff, things like augmented reality. The thing is that essentially there wasn't any particularly suitable projects that are out in New Zealand for a while that I was working on. And, in consultancies, you've got to keep moving, you've got to keep stuff moving forward. So one time I connected via a portal called Mentor Loop. I connected with Raymond Lowe, who I believe is an associate member of the Institute for Railway Signalling Engineers. And he said that he was being absolutely run into the ground and he'd love somebody to help him with his movement and operations diagrams for Inland Rail. And I was like, absolutely, that sounds really cool. Mm-hmm. I've always been a rail fan. I grew up in the UK. I think one of my Thomas the Tank Engine favourite show for more years than I feel comfortable saying out loud. Always used to go down to the West Coast Main, Berkhamsted Station, watch the trains go by. Always used to want to be on one of the Express Virgin trains to Birmingham. Never have done right now, but HS2 is going to be better, so I think I'll wait for that. So I get into Raymond, and suddenly I'm working, doing these ops diagrams. I'm learning so much about ATMS. I'm learning so much about Inland Rail. It's such a fantastic project. And I was just like, yeah, I want to get to Raymond's point. In his career, Raymond's, signalling engineer. And I'm like, yeah, I'll dive headfirst into signalling engineering. And then I hopped across the ditch to Melbourne, where I did some railway signalling training at Newport Academy. I worked on a few projects, the Western Programme Alliance, Mount Derrimut Road, for people who are familiar. And then also some work on the Suburban Rail Loop, which I wish I could talk about, but I can't. Where I had the absolute privilege of working with Tom Godfrey, who's a fellow of the Institute of Railway Signalling Engineers. And we keep in touch to this day. He's wonderful. He's actually going for IRSE Council as well. So those of you who do vote for that kind of thing, do consider Tom Godfrey. I had a phenomenal, as not only a signalling engineer, but also as a mentor. He's just brilliant.
I certainly will. I'm always happy when we have Australians getting into the council. The next IRSE president.
No. He lives in Bristol.
Ah, okay. Well, that's a different thing then. That's a different thing. I may rather root for the Australians. Yeah, the next president will be from Australia. That's quite cool. As of March, I think next year.
I heard that today. Yes. Well. He's applying for council, not presidency. Yeah,
okay. Yeah. No. I don't think for the presidency there are any competitors. I think that this is set up years in advance. You become a council member first, and at some stage you become vice president, and then the next year you will be the president. And
we love our well-defined processes, don't we, Dog?
We do at the IRSE, absolutely. Yeah. So IRSE, you did mention it, but just making it sure for any listeners who don't know, the IRSE is the Institution for Railway Signal Engineers. It's a global organization headquartered in the UK, in London, and Australia and New Zealand has we call it Australasia, has quite a strong arm, one of the biggest IRSE subgroups outside of the UK. So, that just as a side remark.
You should also add the Indians to that. I think the India section.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I said.
If not the largest.
Yeah, I said one of the largest, not the largest, but yeah, India is quite big as well. That's true.
Very true. When I came back, finished my training, I was shut out of New Zealand for a little while. Had to wait in Melbourne for longer than I originally intended. But when I got back to New Zealand, I realised that in order to really progress as a signalling engineer, really develop, I was going to have to be learning from a signalling engineer in New Zealand, on New Zealand projects, being able to go out on site. And Arab New Zealand was not planning on hiring a signalling engineer direct to New Zealand. So I instead looked around and I found James Clenden's work, evidence of James Clenden's work, who is on the management committee of the IRSE Australasian section. And I applied for his company. I'd read through his work in his bid documents. I sent him a cold email, and it impressed him enough that we had a coffee meeting. And then afterwards, he offered me a job, and I'm very happy as a signalling engineer for his company, Rail Infrastructure Consultants New Zealand Limited. And it's not just his company. There's also Robert French, there's Stephen Knight, but James is the signalling expert.
Yeah.
And man, I've been, I'm really enjoying it, and I'm really looking forward to spending a good amount of time at IRSE.
Yeah, a couple of remarks there. I mean, for one, James is certainly one of the most outstanding signaling engineers in New Zealand. It's always difficult to pick he's the best or he's the third best or whatever, but he's certainly one of the better ones. I've got to know James from the ETCS Level 1 project in Auckland. He presented on conferences about this a lot. So he was one of the most outstanding, prominent people working on that project. And then later on, or more recently, I worked together with him on the business case planning for Level 2, ETCS Level 2 in Wellington, which was good. So I think very highly of him, and I'm pretty sure you can learn heaps from him. The other remark, and that's not trying to sugarcoat you, I think you would have impressed me as well if we had a coffee meeting. So if I had been in James' shoes, I probably would have hired you as well. Because, I was going to say this at the end of our conversation, but I was actually quite impressed in the first chats that we had, how much perspective you already have being in the industry for only 2 years. So I think that's quite outstanding. And that's where I thought we're having this conversation, because this is going to be fun, I think.
Thank you, Doug. That's very nice of you to say. And I have to say, James kind of outstanding engineer from my limited perspective. Phenomenal guy to work for, learn from, and if James says that I do a good job, that means a great deal to me.
Yes. You're doing some stuff outside your work as well. You are quite engaged in the IRSE, in the younger member section. How did this come about? Had it to do with James as well, because he was working there?
Not quite. So my involvement in the IRSE Australasian section predates my joining Rail and Structure Consultants and ever meeting James. When I was over in Melbourne, Richard Stevens, who is very active in the Australasia section, and I believe he's a member of the Professional Education Committee, doing great work on making sure that there's a pathway for non-degree holding but still incredibly competent signalling engineers to be Victorian Queensland registered professional engineer via the chartered engineering process in the UK. So Richard Stevens is on that. Richard Stevens also has sunk a lot of his time and effort into trying to build up the Younger Members Committee after a hiatus due to COVID and other factors. Richard now has a formal position as our senior liaison, given that Richard is not exactly a younger member by many people's definition.
Yeah.
But he's absolutely valuable, introducing us to IRSE people, IRSE processes, giving us incredibly helpful suggestions, and just being a sane voice of reason often. So the reason is Richard's a part of WABTEC in Victoria, and he's fairly senior in that organisation. And he was putting together a new Younger Members Committee based around our former chair, Sir Chelang. And there was a number of WABTEC engineers, Prabhat Vishal Kadri, I think it's Prabhat. Prabhat Vishal Aishwarya now, she's come on board. Kayu Tong, I think, came in through a similar way I came in. So Kayu and I were, for a brief time, we worked at IRSE Melbourne together in the signaling team. So Kayu's now at UGL, but essentially via Richard's WABTEC connections and via Richard's connections to IRSE signaling team through Jane Gillespie, who's the rail team lead, another wonderful, wonderful woman who did an incredible amount for me, getting me into the industry. So I'd like to say thank you, Jane. She's not a signaling engineer or an engineer at all, but she's phenomenal doing what she does as a rail team. Was rail team leader. Through those connections, I got the opportunity to join the Younger Members Committee, and and that was I think it was maybe coming up to a year now. The circum chair, and during the COVID stuff, there wasn't too much we could organise. But, we've been designing the committee, making plans for what we want to do, our strategy documents, our remit documents, getting everything in place so that in 2023, we intend to provide webinar series, an updated training calendar, and, organise social events. And we're aiming to hit the ground running in 2023. Year of delivery for the Younger Members Committee.
There's so much I like about this that I hardly know where to start. So for one, obviously the training calendar, I believe, is an excellent idea, and we've already spoken about this. I do provide lots of training courses myself, and just letting members know that these courses exist across the board. So not just my courses, but any course that is there. As far as CBTC is concerned, I think I'm the only one doing this in Australia for now. And or for a number of years, that is. And for ETCS, it's a similar thing. I think I'm doing the only ETCS training in Australia that's not in-house of an organization doing ETCS, such as Transport for New South Wales or so, but the only open training where basically anybody can apply for and enroll and have the training. So being involved in that would obviously be quite interesting. The other thing I liked a lot was your last remark that 2023 is the year of delivery. I can fully subscribe to that. I've got very, very high ambitions for 23. And one of those things is actually launching this podcast that we're currently talking about here. And by the time we speak, I haven't even made the formal announcement that this thing will start in early 2023. Yeah, this is one of the things that's coming. And I've got a few other things planned up my sleeve. Yeah, to be announced later. I don't want to put too many spoilers out there. I think the younger members
counting down the days. We're waiting.
Yes.
We're waiting for the announcement.
Yes.
I had I had the preview, so I think I know what's coming. But
This 12th.
I am dearly looking forward to listening to the other interviews that you've done.
Yeah. So this 12th December announcement will be about this podcast series. And I'm really excited because I've got speakers lined up from 6 different countries for the first 6 interviews. Some are younger members, such as you, but I think very impressive younger members. I liked all the conversations with those younger chaps. And then I've got a few very senior people in the industry with lots of experience. It's a very nice international mix. There are people from Europe, there are people from Asia, there are people from America. And I think this is going to be great. And as you can see, we're recording this on video as well. So it will be both audio and video, which I think is relatively new in the rail industry. And I hope that people like it. I think the younger members, I always had a bit of a neck for the younger member section of the IRSE, even though that I haven't qualified age-wise for a long time. I think 35 is your cutoff or something like this, if I'm not mistaken.
It's either under 35 or if you have fewer than 5 years of experience in the industry.
Okay, well, I think I've been beyond both of these points for a long time. Age-wise, probably even more than with the 5 years of experience. But there we go. But no, I always liked working with younger members. For a while, for my first training courses, I had some younger members joining me for free, in exchange for them helping me a little bit with the organization of the event, like making sure that people came back from their breaks in time for the next session of the training. So smaller things that didn't really miss anything of the training. So I think for them, it was really a good deal. And I think the younger members of the IRSE are really in the pole position when it comes to getting new talent into the industry. And I think you are also very much into this, and maybe you can talk about some of your ideas how to possibly attract more talent from universities, high schools, whatever.
Sure. To preface this, one of the so broadly, I've submitted a remit to management committee because I have put my name forward to be the chair of the Australasian Younger Members Committee. I don't think we mentioned that yet. As the former chair has stepped down for reasons that are very personal, very reasonable. But won't go into it. Just keep that there. But So I put forward as part of my application, I put forward a proposed remit for the chair of the Younger Members Committee, and it outlines, basically 4 key things that, as chair of the Younger Members Committee, I want to be achieving. And those are, the first thing is that I want to be a representative voice for the younger members on the management committee, and that means, in my opinion, that I need to set up my own committee. I need to set up my own committee, and it should represent a diverse range of regions. Where we've got where we've got significant IRSE membership, I'd like to have one representative from each region, and the regions are, Queensland, Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia, New South Wales, and New Zealand. That's that committee being representative, and also I'd like a variety of rail organisations, so not just consultants and design houses, but also equipment suppliers, contractors and maintainers, rail network operators, below rail infrastructure operators, and above rail infrastructure operators for freight and passenger. So I decided I need to set up this committee that would have a range of younger members' voices from across the industry that I'd be able to represent to the management committee. The second thing I want to do is I want to enhance the experience of being an IRSE member to younger members in Australasia. And what does that mean? Well, I want to be providing professional development, early career professional development opportunities, such as training courses and webinars and training calendar. Well, not providing training courses ourselves, but creating a calendar which is centralized, which has widespread, so that young professional railway signalling engineers can pick, and then also a social networking events, because that's been lackluster. The COVID response policies have made it more difficult to connect with us in the industry, and younger members are feeling that. Younger members especially, because we don't have the connections, we don't have the community that's been built. Often we've been working from home. Like I have never met Raymond Lowe. If you remember, he's the man who got me into signalling. I've never met the man in person.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of environment that we've been working in, and we've been entering the industry. And so I want to change that and build a community, face-to-face, meet space rather than cyberspace. So we come on to the third point, which I believe you were talking about, outreach. Yes. So outreach. Where do we grow the railway signalling industry in Australasia from at the younger members level? Well, I think that there are going to be three main sources for that. The first thing is going to be people emigrating to Australasia, and they're going to primarily come from the United Kingdom, and they're going to and from India, because those are the countries that have, frankly, I'm going to say economies that are struggling more than the Australasian economies that are reasonably strong. These are people that have the skills, they have excellent training. Network Rail and Indian Railways provide excellent signalling training for their young staff. Mm-hmm. So naturally, we're going to have them come over, and we're also those are going to be the main, and also the signalling systems, the railway control systems, the principles that underline them. They all come from the same root, from the UK signalling system, so they integrate very easily into Australasian networks. You'll find a lot of Brits and a lot of South Asians working in the signalling industry, and that's the reason why. So we're going to get growth from that, and there's not much from younger members, and there's not much that we're really going to do to change. That'll just occur. It's a long way to go out for outreach, and there are more lower-hanging fruit close to home. So the second group of people are going to be people like me, who were doing some other engineering in or adjacent to railways. And we're going to want to outreach and then connect with them through venues like the Railway Technical Society of Australasia, maybe even the larger engineering bodies such as Engineers Australian Engineering Museum, providing early professional-based webinar series and talks at industry events to try and explain what signalling engineering is, what railway control systems are, what does a signalling engineer look like, and what kind of job opportunities and projects that we're working on. See if we can get anyone with the right skill set that feels they're a little bit underutilized, like I felt in my digital engineering role, in there like that. The third way is at the undergraduate level, and perhaps the postgraduate level too. And that's going to mean outreach directly to universities for students that are studying, relevant qualifications. That will be electrical, electronic, computer systems, mechatronics. And then on the edges of that, you've got software engineering students and the mechanical engineering students. But basically trying to broaden in both, an undergraduate qualification, a postgraduate qualification, and trying to just make them aware. Railway control systems is a significant and growing field, and it's a field which is incredibly interesting. We use systems that are used nowhere else in the world. We're designing to tolerances and to levels of effectiveness that you won't really see outside of, say, the defense sector or the energy sector. But those are incredibly limited by region, geography, and nationality. So the railways are everywhere, and that's one of the reasons I love being the railways. So those are the two things we're going to target: professional organizations with young professional engineers in and around infrastructure, and then undergraduate and postgraduate students. Long-winded, but we got there in the end.
Yeah. Now it's a good idea. It's very important to attract people as long as they are young. There is so much potential in there. They're learning very quickly. If you have a right mix of experienced people to mentor, basically, or give some guidance, and then younger, intelligent people who can pick things up quickly, then we get people like you, who work in the industry for 2 years and who can have discussions pretty much at the highest level without any difficulty. So anybody, but when I grew up, when I started the signaling career, I had a very experienced guy saying, in our business, and that was the design of interlockings, it needs 10 years before you can halfway walk by yourself. At the time, I was terribly impressed. I was actually, how do you say, I was almost humiliated by that. Yeah. So I didn't really go anywhere near interlockings for the longest part of my career because I thought it would be so terribly difficult. These days, I would probably tell them, mate, your design tools must be crap if it takes 10 years to pick them up. Yeah. So it can't be this difficult. If it would take 10 years for someone joining the signaling industry from the outside to basically be able to work halfway independently by himself, it's just too long. We cannot afford that. And I don't think we have to afford it. I think it works much, much faster. And I have interviewed examples for that quite recently. There was one person who went straight into the maintenance of CBTC, his very first signaling job, went straight into a technology which is supposedly the most complex of them all and the most sophisticated. And he said it was relatively easy. I mean, he got some training. Somebody explained it to him logically, and the rest was learning on the job, and he was okay. And in no time, basically, he did a decent job as a team leader in maintenance. And this is how it should be. And I think if people put signaling too much on a pedestal, like how hard it is and how complicated it is, I think very often this is just to make themselves feel more important or more special or whatever. I personally don't like this at all. Yeah, if I just want to disseminate my knowledge, if somebody ends up better than me in 3 years, 5 years, well done. Yeah, it's more important for the industry to really get people on board, to get people involved, and to increase the numbers that we have to compensate for the older people who go into retirement and are soon no longer available for projects. I think this mindset that signaling is so terribly complicated is just wrong. These days, I rather have a let's do it attitude. Yeah, can't be that hard. So having a mentor, I mean, just imagine you would have had your first mentor would have done everything in his mind to convince you how terribly difficult signaling is. I'm not sure whether you would have stayed in the industry. Yeah. Or your career path may have developed a bit differently from what you've done. Yeah.
Perhaps. I think one thing as a junior signaling engineer that I do respect is I have a tremendous respect for the safety critical nature of our work.
Yes.
And I personally will not I personally believe it's not up to me to consider myself competent enough to do an independent design or to review. It will be up to James or any other senior signaling engineers that I have to work with at that point.
Yes.
It's very, very important that one has an utmost respect, not only for the competency of one's superiors, in my opinion, but also the incredibly, safety critical function of our work. We have the ultimate responsibility for ensuring that railways are designed safely.
Yes.
And maintained of course, there's a huge amount of responsibility that goes towards, the principal maintenance technicians and the principals testers, without question. But we absolutely share in that safety critical environment, protecting, conflicting, flanking, opposing collisions, and where possible derailments. If we have the ability to control the speed of the vehicle, or say if we're automating, if we're introducing higher grades of operational automation, then we take on more and more responsibility for the safe operation of the railway as time goes by. And personally, I think that it will take 10 years before I do become, at my current rate of development, before I do become or attain independent competency to be independent, mostly independent.
Yeah.
But that doesn't worry me. I feel that I've had and have an excellent cast of mentors and will have in the future to guide me along this journey. And then when I achieve that, it will then be my responsibility to pass on to the next generation.
Yeah.
Because we do have a special culture. We have a professional ethic that goes beyond anything I've ever experienced in my previous career. And, it motivates me,
And maybe in fairness, I may have misinterpreted it back then, but for me, it just had the effect to scare me off. And in hindsight, it's probably a good thing, because I don't think that I would have had quite the right attitude for an interlocking designer, because of this need to be so meticulous regarding safety, and not just double checking, but basically triple checking and quadruple checking things. I started my career in design as well, but for control systems. So without the safety aspect, but still those control systems that I designed were controlling the interlockings. So basically the entire interlocking functionality, or the operation of interlockings, was done by the systems that I was designing. So there was no room for any errors as well. It had to be right, otherwise the interlocking would not have worked properly. And I was basically capable of doing design by myself after about a year. A further year in, I started to become a team leader for a group of other designers. So my learning curve, or my path to being fully independent as a designer, was certainly much, much faster than it would have been in the interlocking space. That doesn't mean that my work wasn't checked. That doesn't mean that there wasn't still a test center where our control systems were brought together with the interlocking for an integration test. And quite often there were a few design flaws or overlooking things that just came up in the test center. But better they came up in the test center than out in the field. Yeah.
Quite. And yeah, it's the respect. I think with regards to interlocking specifically, so Tom Godfrey, I mentioned him earlier. He worked on Bombardier's interlocking product, Evilock. Evilock 950. Yeah. It's CityFlow 650 and Evilock 950.
Yes.
Which are soon to be quite well depreciated due to the sale of Bombardier rail to Alstom. But however, interlocking principles do remain the same. And what struck me as remarkable is, I should probably say that, but I've had the privilege of viewing, sternal code, which is essentially it's a wrapper for C that is very, very specialized towards interlocking circuits based on a relay design. So when you see a sternal circuit, a piece of sternal code, it's presented to you as a relay circuit. And they're simple, yes, but the functionality must be completely understood. And when I was doing my degree, I really gravitated towards model-based control. I gravitated towards systems in which the designer, the engineer, understands at a principled level what the system is doing. Because what you see is a lot of engineering systems are moving towards black box components with machine learning algorithms, where the internal functions of the machine, they're not just not known. In many cases, they're not able to be known. They're unintelligible, non-interpretable. So I always gravitated away from that and towards control systems where I understood what was going on from both a parameter perspective, an environment perspective, and a system dynamics perspective. And I love that in railway signaling because there's no room for error. There's no margin for error. If these systems have an unexpected occurrence, especially a SIL 4, a vital system has an unexpected occurrence, then it can cause, that's unacceptable. Unless it's an incredibly random, rare set of events. And that, I love that. Like all throughout my engineering education and career, I've been drawn to deterministic systems. And there's nothing really more deterministic, in my opinion, as an engineering field than railway signaling and railway signaling engineering.
Yeah.
I was going to add and telecoms, but telecoms is not deterministic. That's not so, and that's why it's not safety critical.
Tell me about it. I mean, I have a steep personal learning curve at the moment with my recordings here, where I start measuring things. I start measuring performance, and you connect a different type of antenna where the manufacturer promised holy oath that they would be much better, and suddenly your performance goes right down, like by a factor of 5 or something like this. I must say I'm very, very happy that I'm not in the telecommunications industry, because I think signaling is a little bit more, as you said, deterministic, and I quite like it that way.
Yeah, I think it's a special mindset. I've never, since joining the signaling industry, I've been surrounded by people who think in broadly the same way. I mean, regardless of one's gender, one's ethnicity, there's a mindset and a common way of seeing the world and engineering that kind of pervades, and I really enjoy being a part of this community. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
It is a lot of fun at a fundamental level. I do want to describe go into a bit more detail about how Tom Godfrey taught me about interlocking, and because we were talking about a CBTC application of EBILOC 950. Then what I had to learn was essentially how does the general application, how does one build the specific application of an EBILOC 950 installation out of the general application of the EBILOC software. And what was really useful to find out is there's actually only 3 types of railway track at a very basic level in existence in the railways. And those are plain track, from a signaling perspective, not from a railway track construction perspective. But you have plain track, you have turnouts, and you have diamond or oblique crossings.
Yeah.
And that's it. And every single other piece of complex track work which requires an interlocking can be constructed from those three basic components. And one of the reasons why I want to run these webinars is because I want to explain that. When I talk about, junctions, like what's a railway junction? How do we build it up? What do we have to control? I found it so much easier to explain to someone who doesn't have a background in interlocking let's have a look at a turnout. How do we signal a turnout? That's it, just a turnout. Then have a look at an oblique crossing. How does one signal an oblique crossing? And then you can move on to more interesting things. Like generally I'll go to a double line junction or perhaps scissor crossover. Normally I stay away from double slips just because everything's so crowded. So scissor crossover, a double line junction, and you say, here's the diamond, here are the turnouts, so therefore we'll need these signals. Now these signals are co-located, so let's combine them into one signal, and then you can talk about things like routes, and then you can say, right, this turnout has these 3 routes, or this turnout has these 4 routes associated with it, and a diamond crossing also has 4 routes associated with it. You know, the layout of the junction itself, how the plane track connects the turnouts and the diamond crossings, limits the amount of overall routes that we have in the junction from, you know, the space of permutations of all possible routes is limited by the layout of the junction. You can tell that I really love mathematics as well. I tend to get quite mathematical because when I program, I have the privilege of learning C first, which means that, you know, you have to consider the mathematics of the algorithm and, you know, stuff like, you know, complexity, order number, or operations. So I come at this kind of stuff designed from a mathematical perspective. And then with interlocking, it's like, right, eliminate all the other possibilities, all the routes that can't exist. You're left with what you do. You signal the boundary of the junction, and then plan your route from there. And I found it a very useful way to introduce people to interlocking. Not necessarily from what do signaling engineers have to design? You design that, then you design that, then you design that. Then it's more like, what is the ultimate purpose of this junction? And then at every stage you think about, right, you've designed this, and it's as simple as possible to meet the purpose that we just established. However, there's a problem. You know, it's like train operated route release. The reason why we have train operated route release is because when we move from, you know, mechanical signal, when we move from signal box operation at junctions to, you know, train control center operation at junctions, no longer was there, you know, obvious indications such as lever frames of whether a route was still set or not. So there had to be a route release mechanism. And one of the most convenient ways of doing that is train operated route release. And it's like, but if you don't kind of explain where Tor came from, it's quite difficult unless you've been working with the system or you actually were a train controller or signaler to really understand it.
Yeah.
So I love looking at signaling as a chronological development of systems, because it is a chronology. It's a wonderful chronology, and it's also very mathematical, very programmatical, and you build up. And I love thinking about things from a constructivist perspective. Like, what are our building blocks, our base building blocks? By the way, can you guess what my favorite toy was when I was a kid? I think most viewers probably could.
It must have been something pretty complicated, yeah, like a self-built robot or something like that, or
no, not at all. It was literally the wooden blocks that you give a kid so they can build little railways.
Yeah.
You put it down, and I do remember spending like hours like just looking at the geometry, because these blocks, you know, they're carved in wood and they've got the 2 tracks. But I was always just looking at the junction blocks going, how does, you know, the axle of my little train set take both routes? And I only had to apply little bits of pressure to it to get to go one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I wasn't quite there because, you know.
Interesting. Since you mentioned these cool wooden railways, that you basically have there at a very simple level a very similar thing to what you just said. You only have that many different types of tracks. I mean, you still have a differentiation in the building blocks between a straight piece of track and a curved piece of track. But if you put those two into the same category, you end up with either a piece of track or a turnout or a crossover. And then you may have a buffer stop as well, but that's about it. And a variety of those things, if you buy yourself an extension box with more track elements, you've got more of the same. You still only have these 3 or 4 types of elements, maybe 5 if you say, okay, a curve is slightly different from a straight piece, at least for building up your railway layout. But yeah, it's impressive how much you can learn just from those simple things by simply looking at it. And interestingly, I think I've seen examples before where principles of railway signaling were explained to students at university using a model railway. Like basically
absolutely.
pushing the trains along, like saying, okay, well, we've got a train here, we've got a train there. If we have both trains running, there will be an accident. So we can't really have that. Therefore, the one train needs to stop. The other train needs to have priority. While the other train is going the turnout, the other one can't come into the flank because that's another accident. Things like this. You're talking with so much passion about that I'm struggling a bit to get you away from that, because I didn't really expect this conversation to become a lesson in detailed signaling design. And a lot of the listeners have, well, not so much to do with signaling. So chances are that some of these discussions are going a little bit over their head, including myself, to be honest. I'm really not a detailed signaling designer myself, which is strange on the one hand. If you work in signaling for 30 years, and everybody seems to expect you are fluent in designing those systems, detailed design and conventional signaling. So what I normally do these days is simply saying you get a lot cheaper resources doing the same kind of work than paying me for that, notwithstanding to say that I haven't done this for 20 years or so. And even if I was agreeing to do that, it would probably take me quite a while to become fluent in this again. Yeah, so it would be really a waste of my time, a waste of my employer's time. So I'm not going to do this. Yeah? I'm rather specializing in some strategic advice for modern signaling systems such as CVTC, advanced ETCS, and things like that, and doing training courses on that. And that's working reasonably well, and people see the value in those things. Yeah, I don't think anybody would pay me lots of money for a conventional signaling design, because there are many other people out there. You would probably run circuits around me if it came to that kind of design, and that's fine, because I have no ambition to compete with you on that ever. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we don't compete. That's the thing, is that our commercial departments might compete with one another. But whichever commercial department wins is going to have more signaling design work than they can handle, and we're all going to have to move over to that other company regardless.
Yeah.
So the work gets completed. We cooperate as signaling engineers and railway telecommunications engineers, professionals, whatever the money people to call them that. Whatever they decide is, we're going to be working on Australasian railways.
Yeah.
And that's the way, that's the way it's going to be. I don't see it. I've never felt like I've been in competition with any other railway signaling engineers. Even when we were both Arab and Motts, Jacobs, and I think another consultancy were going for Geelong Fast Rail, and I was doing a training course with the young signaling engineers at Motts.
Yeah. Oricon was the third company.
Oricon is, that's what I thought. I thought it was Oricon, but I wasn't quite sure. But yeah, that alliance, the JAM alliance, what did I feel like I was in competition with them? No, they're my they're colleagues and people who I'll cooperate with, and they work on different systems, so that I don't have to work on them.
Yeah.
We've all got lots on our plate. Rather too much on our plate.
It's certainly a different setting if you do design work for a consultancy compared to working for a supplier. So I came from the signaling supply industry, and the competitive idea was alive and kicking there for decades. Yeah? With some suppliers to a degree that really was close to ridiculous. I had this once at a conference where I was walking over to the stand of one of the other suppliers, the competitors, if you wish. They knew me, they knew I was working for a different company for the competition. And what they actually did, they had a demonstrator built up for showing visitors the capabilities of their control system. They literally shut down their computer when they saw me walking over. And I thought, well, how ridiculous is this? What could I have seen that I could have used for spying purposes, like changing our product so that it becomes better than their product? It was just utterly ridiculous. But it's very much a mindset issue. If you basically indoctrinate people all day long that there's competition and you can't trust them and so on, then this is your mindset. these days, I rather share a mindset that you have, where I see people as potential collaboration partners rather than competitors. I think there's more than enough work in the marketplace for everybody here, probably even more than what can be managed. That's why we are so much after new resources and new talent coming in. So this whole notion of competition, I mean, especially here in Australia, it's quite funny. You can compete with another company for one project, and then 2 weeks later you work on another project, and suddenly you are alliance partners or something like that. Yeah, so it can change in a split second, or one company is a subcontractor of the other company, and suddenly they are your client instead of your competitor, and it's So this whole idea of I can't share my knowledge, I can't tell them anything, this is all rubbish. Yeah, I hope we can, as an industry, can.
We should let the probity bureaucrats and lawyers talk about that. One final thing before we hang up, Frank. When I was describing the four things that I was broadly going to do in my remit as application for chair of the Younger Members Committee, I only mentioned three. And for posterity, I had said a fourth thing was simply that I need to be accountable to the management.
I'd like to thank you for the interesting talk. It was a little bit different than what I thought it might be. But this is the nice thing about these conversations, that you basically get the ball rolling, and then wherever the ball rolls is what happens. So the idea of this whole thing was to not have this rehearsed, to not send you a list of questions before, which you can write down your answers and then possibly read them from a piece of paper where everybody says, well, this guy is fake, he's just reading up his answers. I never wanted this for this podcast, and I hope that listeners appreciate this, even though sometimes the conversation goes in a slightly unexpected direction. But I still found it of interest, especially signaling engineers will probably have gotten a ton out of it. And I hope we also got some ideas for younger people or people who are interested to coming into our industry, how they could possibly do it and where they could get some help. So thanks very much for talking to me today. And for all you listeners out there, do all the right things, like, subscribe, share the podcast with other people who might be interested. And until next time, keep it simple.